Hello and welcome to the North Coast Journal Preview, where we take a look at the stories in the current edition of the North Coast Journal. I'm your host, Dave Frank, and I'm joined today by Thad Greenson, news editor, and Jennifer Fumiko Cahill, arts and features editor at the North Coast Journal. Welcome, guys.
Hey, Dave. How you doing?
Pretty good. I got a sunshine, blue sky day, which is always great. Kind of hanging in there. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that prior to this call, Thad, you mentioned there's some breaking news. So before we dive into what you guys are covering this week on the cover of the North Coast Journal, why don't you share with us the outstanding and amazing breaking news for our community here?
Yeah, it is now official that Humboldt State University is no longer. It is now California Polytechnic University at Humboldt. Humboldt State has now become the state's third polytechnic university.
Which is fantastic. Can you give us like a quick sense of what that might mean, an impact on our community?
Well, it's going to mean a huge expansion of HSU, basically. The state is pumping in, I think, close to $500 million into facility and grounds improvements at HSU and program improvements. And HSU is hoping that under this new designation, it will double its enrollment within the next few years. So we're looking at a much larger HSU that's more polytechnic focused.
Fantastic. Jen, you were going to add something.
I am just trying to figure out the acronym.
Oh.
I'm working on it. And
it's going to be Cal Poly Humboldt for short.
Okay. CPH.
CPH. All right. We'll have to come up with something clever. I'm sure people will figure out something clever to call it over time. So that's cool. I'm glad we were able to get that on air, like breaking news. It's really exciting for everybody, and I'm sure we'll cover a lot more about the implications, how this rolls out over time. But
we'll definitely have more in next week's journal about it.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm sure, right? So we'll talk about it next week. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're covering in the news as news editor this week? I think you want to give a little teaser before we dive into the cover. So why don't you go ahead and
So before I get to the cover story, we have a really solid news story this week about by staff writer Kimberly Weir. It's working from a bunch of records we received through a California Public Records Act request from the city of Arcata. Trying to get some more insight into what's happened with former Mayor Brett Watson, a sitting council member. And as I'm sure folks remember, there was a big to-do in October where Mayor Watson was kind of stripped of his mayorship, which was then and then the council issued a no confidence vote in him shortly after he announced that he was going to be going into a 30-day rehabilitation program to work on some personal stuff. He is now back sitting on the council, and so the records that we received kind of don't really offer a ton of insight into what the allegations specifically are facing him, but they offer a lot into kind of the real-time reactions of his fellow council members as they tried to kind of got more information and tried to navigate what to do with him as a fellow council member and stuff. So it's worth a read, and there's, I'm sure, lots more to come on that story as well.
All right, thank you.
It's really interesting too, because it is one of those things that you don't see unless journalists ask for it. We frequently find, we see exposés and things like that, but these local CPRA requests that, for example, that the journal put in this time, they are often the catalyst for other discoveries and other information, and it's one of the most valuable tools that we have in California in particular, and Thad has written about them extensively, actually. And you'll see coverage of this story and of these very texts in other outlets, etc. But we requested it because it was important to discovering how these choices are made, and what the substance of the allegations is, and things like that. And I think it's worth paying attention to the outlets that are doing the work of trying to uncover all this stuff. A lot of the digging that well, the digging that I do is mostly going places and eating French fries, but for Thad and Kim and the rest of our newsroom, a lot of the work of journalism is filling out paperwork, hassling people, calling and saying, how come I haven't gotten this yet? Fighting people who say, oh, you shouldn't get it because it doesn't fall under that category. And then sometimes going to court over it. But even when it all comes in, then begins the slog of hunting through a zillion text messages, a zillion redacted files, and just it can be overwhelming. So that kind of information, you get because of slog and day-to-day grunt work. And I applaud our newsroom for doing it and for not making me do it.
Hey, Thad, I just want to just mention this since Jen said it. Well, I think it's worth kind of clarifying. Typically, at least from a sort of a layperson's perspective, one would think that when you request documents, you're getting like formal documents like transcripts or things that are in someone's files. But in fact, as Kim's story shows, which I strongly encourage people to read, you can also request person-to-person communications of public officials. So this is what you did. Can you just comment on that briefly?
Yeah, absolutely. There's kind of a mountain of case law at this point in California saying that when public officials are communicating with each other, if they're talking about public business, that's public. And so anytime these communications are written, whether they're text messages, direct messages on a social media platform, anything like that, if they're discussing a matter of public business and public importance, like what to do with a sitting council member or allegations facing a sitting council member, then the courts have ruled that the public has a right to see that and review it. So these records requests used to be a lot kind of cleaner and easier when you're just asking for, when people didn't communicate via text and direct message and all these other things. And, but thankfully in California, case law has really caught up to saying that, no, anytime a public official is putting something in writing, whether it's a Post-it note or a text message or an email or an official memo, that's about a public decision or the carrying out of public business, then the public has a right to see that. And,
thank you for sort of underlining this, because I think it's really important, and it'll be a theme that recurs over time for you and your crew in the newsroom. So thank you to you and Kim for making this happen this week.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate Jen bringing it up, that I think it is important for folks to realize that a lot of work and research does go into putting together these requests, seeing them through, and then, sorting through all of what comes back in return.
A similar vein, the Eureka Police Department scandal with the alleged text. I think it's not alleged anymore. It is a scandal, and there were texts from the EPD folks. So that that was Sacramento who did that. But anyway, you guys picked it up and continued to make sure everybody in the community stays informed. But on that note, why don't we dive right in? Well, we're not diving in, but why don't we transition to what you covered in the cover story? I think it's really important also.
Yeah, so this week's cover story dives into the controversy surrounding Measure S, which is the county cannabis cultivation tax that voters passed with 66% of the vote back in 2016. Folks may have noticed that last week there was a large protest in front of the Humboldt County Courthouse with a lot of growers and members of the cannabis associated with the cannabis industry locally, who were kind of decrying the tax and calling on the Humboldt County Board of Supervisors to repeal it.
So this cover story is called Cannabis in Crisis, and just sort of as a general statement, the way this was described by the representative from the Humboldt County Growers Alliance, this really does sound like a perfect storm that is impacting our community very strongly now and for the next, say, 3 years. They're looking for a sort of immediate relief. Do you mind kind of spelling out the basic issues around their request for the temporary repeal of Measure S from the Board of Supervisors?
Yeah, so I think anybody who's kind of been following the cannabis industry since recreational legalization went into place has heard kind of complaints about overregulation, the high costs that they're facing in coming into compliance, and then just kind of some of the challenges in kind of onboarding to the legal market. And it's been a very expensive process for a lot of farmers. And so what Natalinda Lapp, the executive director of the Humboldt County Growers Alliance, the way she described it was really that over the last year and a half, market forces have also changed significantly. And so while growers are facing kind of all these new tax burdens and also these compliance costs, the market has really shifted. And so And the basic issue California has statewide, not just in Humboldt County, is we have just a massive oversupply of cannabis on the legal market. And so the state's latest estimates are that while growers in California are producing I think it's over 6 million pounds of cannabis a year. Legal markets are only using a little over 2 million pounds a year. So obviously there's massive oversupply. And, what that has led to is just a plummeting wholesale price of cannabis flower. And, this hasn't been spread evenly across the board. Data also shows that cannabis consumers, folks who go into dispensaries and buy legal cannabis, overwhelmingly prefer indoor grown cannabis due to a whole variety of reasons that we don't need to go into. And, in the midst of that, California or Humboldt County produces 95% of what it produces is outdoor cannabis. And so really the county has found itself amid this kind of glut of supply at a huge disadvantage. And growers have seen wholesale prices drop from somewhere around $1,000 a pound about a year ago to less than $500 a pound now. And that's for growers who can even get their product to market. There's also a lot of reports of folks just sitting on inventories they can't sell, sitting on prior year's harvests that they can't sell. And so the way Natalin described it is really that the conditions facing the cannabis industry locally are bleak, and a lot of farms are just on the brink of insolvency. And so while Measure S is not the biggest issue facing local growers, it's not the highest taxes they're paying or anything like that, it is kind of the most readily, it's the easiest thing for them to address immediately. And so while changing the state tax code is probably a year-long process, and they're lobbying to do that, the way that Measure S was written, it allows a majority of the Board of Supervisors, 3 supervisors, to lower those taxes or repeal them entirely. And so that's what growers are asking for.
And so how's this playing out? The macro issue, as you described, is markets changing and tax burden under Measure S. But what exactly is like are they kind of asking for, and how is this being received? Like I know you have on the record here, District 2 Supervisor comments and feedback on this. I think that's a good insight into where the community, where the point of contention really is the request versus what's possible.
Yeah, so the request is that basically Measure S is billed out in 2 cycles. The first bills go out in October. The board already agreed to basically forgive any late payments up to May 31st on that first installment. And then the second installment is due March 15th. So now growers who deferred that first payment have both those payments coming up in the coming months, right as they're leading into growing season. And so what the HCGA is asking for is that both of those bills be forgiven, as well as next year's Measure S payments. Obviously, Humboldt County has, come to expect this revenue, has budgeted for this revenue, and has been spending this revenue. So, to date, $47 million has come into county coffers through Measure S. And I think as of the May payments that are due, they expect to get another $10 million. The county is itself not on super sturdy financial footing. A 7-year budget forecast from, I think, 2019 showed that the county expected to have a $20 million shortfall in 2024, 2025, so just a few years off. And after that forecast was made, the county has agreed to give really sizable raises to all county employees and all law enforcement employees in the county. And the collective, impact of those raises, which, Supervisor Bushnell, the 2nd District Supervisor, and others felt like were really necessary for retaining and attracting quality employees. But the net budget impact of those is about $40 million in a couple years. And so the county is really looking at a significant deficit just a few years out, if not next year. And so they need to balance these competing interests of trying to really give a life jacket to the cannabis industry that some feel might kind of sustain it until other market forces change and it's able to be a little bit more viable, versus kind of furthering this budget hole that the county is going to find itself in.
Well, thank you for that summary. It's synopsis of what the article's got so much more detail and some feedback from some other public officials. But it sounds like this is a really critical time for the local industry, and I think it's important for people to be informed. So thank you for staying on top of this for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last thing I'll add really quickly is this is
Yeah.
coming to the Board of Supervisors February 1st for a public hearing. And Supervisor Bushnell and others have really encouraged anyone with a vested interest, which is everybody in the county, because we all benefit from county services or the cannabis industry, to weigh in, to let their thoughts be known by emailing the supervisors or by participating in that meeting.
Fantastic. Really important point. Thank you for telling people how to get engaged and involved. How about you, Jen? What is going on the arts and features beat this week?
Dave, the other thing that is happening on February 1st is Lunar New Year.
Oh, right on.
So Lunar New Year / Chinese New Year, lots of people around the world celebrate. Humboldt County has a pretty sizable Southeast Asian population, and for lots of Asian people here and abroad, Lunar New Year is a big deal. And this week, Wendy Chan is blessing us and our New Year good fortune with her take on a very classic cookie. Have you ever had one of those very yellow almond cookies with a little almond slice in the middle?
So right? Fortunate. They're delicious.
So good. But usually they're kind of, I don't want to hurt anybody's auntie's feelings, but they can be a little dry.
Yeah.
They can be a little dry.
It happens.
Yeah, and it's a shortening cookie, and it's actually a Chinese American cookie, and which I love. In the same way that fortune cookies are Chinese American and actually a Japanese recipe, the almond cookie as we know it in the form that we get it here is a Chinese American cookie. And Wendy was born in China, but she first had this cookie when she worked at Chin's. And you may recall Chin's being the place where her uncle Ben Chin started here in the 1950s, the first Chinese restaurant back in Humboldt County since the expulsion in the 1880s. So when you ask yourself, how come we don't have more Chinese places? It's the racism. So in fact, not knowing that there was an implicit ban on Chinese, Ben moved up here, started the restaurant. He passed away in 2019. But she recalls making these cookies for customers and handing them around New Year. And just the smell of them in the restaurant. And she found the recipe, the old, typed up recipe with the stains on the card and everything. And she tried making it, but it didn't taste quite right. And it didn't taste like what she remembered. And that often happens with recipes. If you've ever tried to do like your great grandma's recipe or something, and you find that potatoes have changed in size, or that, the consistency of shortening or something else has changed. Basic ingredients may have changed. Flour is different than it used to be. There's a lot of stuff you don't need to sift anymore. But she went through and tried a zillion different things, different flours, kind of like Simona's obsessive cookie thing, but with a Chinese cookie. So she went and tried all this different stuff, and she came up with, as is often the answer and the solution to many problems, lard. Lard was the answer. The shortening cookie is very nice, but if you've ever made like an all shortening pie, the consistency is very different from, say, a lard pie. And she used almond flour for part of the flour and made some other changes. And I have tasted the cookie, and it is moist and sort of like collapses in this lovely way, in a way kind of like a macaron does, where it's the dry crusty outside and then the more moist interior. It's not exactly like that, but it's reminiscent of that, which is probably because of the almond flour. Anyway, they are delightful, and you should absolutely make them. I will be shifting into loose clothing, preparing for the dumpling feast that's coming, but also maybe trying my hand at these cookies that I've never made. They're a cookie that usually just kind of shows up. And so I never had to make them. But now I can't mooch off of Wendy forever. I've got to learn to make my own cookies. And I am really sorry, but once you try these, you might not be satisfied with the ones that you can just pick up in Chinatown at any bakery. I'm sorry.
What's really cool is she actually went through her experimentation process by giving samples to friends and getting feedback.
That's right. It's
so cool to be in her circle, I suppose. Shout out to Wendy for doing that.
I mean, why do you think I stalked this woman and dragged her into our paper? It's not for nothing. Did I mention that there's also duck fat in these bad boys?
No, you didn't.
Duck fat.
Yum.
Duck fat is like, I don't know. Duck fat is to, fats as, shatter is to weed. And it's just got that extra richness, and it just amps up everything. And yeah, it's a different cookie altogether, and it's just delightful. I think sometimes in America we get a little bit nervous about putting duck fat, pig fat. She, by the way, yes, she's rendering her own pork belly. She gets fat from her butcher and then renders it in her house and then calls people and says, "Who needs pig fat?"
I do.
Yeah. But it's very popular in the UK. If you've watched a lot of Great British Baking Show, you'll see that they are constantly making things with suet and making things with lard and making these kinds of a different kind of a flake, a different consistency for lots of their pastries. And it's worth trying out whatever pie recipe you've got going that you love, that you're dedicated to. I know Thad is all about the joy of cooking, half butter, half shortening. Experiment with throwing a little lard in there and just see what happens.
What could go wrong?
What could go wrong?
You might get these amazing cookies.
You might get amazing cookies, but you do have to warn vegetarian friends.
Oh, that's true too.
Vegetarians. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
so what a great tradition. I think it's a great time for people who don't have this in their family's sort of calendar to say, hey, there's the Lunar New Year. Let's try some amazing almond cookies.
And it's auntie approved. That was among the circle of people that Wendy had try the cookie, included her aunties and people who worked with her in the restaurant kitchen. And they were like, this is it. This is our cookie. And there is no more difficult audience and no greater praise than when your aunties say, well done.
So it's got this family tradition, a seal of approval, and now it's in the pages of the North Coast Journal for all of us to make and incorporate into our family's traditions.
Kind of shocking that she shared it.
Yeah, right? Well, right on. I know we don't have too much more time left, but if you don't mind, you mentioned dumplings too. Do you guys have dumplings on recipes in the archives or something?
Yeah, if you go back and look at the journal's archives, if you just go to our search bar and put in dumplings, you will find both Wendy Chan's dumplings, which are like fat, juicy pork ones with shiitake mushroom and other things in them. She has some rather intense recipes. And you'll also find my recipe for my family's hitokuchi gyoza, which are one bite gyoza dumplings. And for both of us, most of the time when you get dumplings in a restaurant, what do you order and you get like 6?
Yeah.
Our dumplings, my recipe makes, I think, 75.
Really?
Yeah, you're in for a penny, in for a pound. You're there,
oh
you're
my
full,
goodness.
Your kitchen's messy. You might as well make like 100 of these bad boys. So
nice.
Same thing, hers make a massive amount, and it's a very fun activity. Try it. Go through our archives, make the cookies, make the dumplings, and enjoy Lunar New Year with the rest of the world.
Right on. I think that's something that I'm going to have to do this year because it just, it seems such an appealing thing to do. And actually, we should probably look into the, also the reason. What are we celebrating? That's another story though. But make it a tradition. I think it's always great to pair food. It brings people together and kind of we can focus on the, it's New Year, right?
If you check out her recipes, she's got some great family stories and some great information.
Well, thank you so much, Jen. Really appreciate this what you've got to share with us about the Lunar New Year almond cookies and other traditions we can incorporate. That's about all the time we have this week. North Coast Journal is available on newsstands now. Pick one up, stay informed. Also available online 24/7, so you can get to it anytime. Thank you both, Thad and Jen, for everything this week. Take care, everybody out there, till we connect again next week.